Man, I sure am glad that the layout of Tartarus has evolved in such a good way. I mean, it was a pretty big deal in my second episode. Surely nothing can go wrong, right? Oh, for crying out loud. Hey, welcome back everyone. I'm Ristel and you're watching part 3 of my P3R Review Series. This episode is going to be a little bit different from the other ones that came before it. After having released episode 2, I realized that I had focused maybe a bit too much on the narrative and not enough on the analysis and on my opinion, which is the entire point of the series, really. I also reconsidered the timing of each episode because I realized that between each boss fights there isn't necessarily a lot to talk about. As such, this episode will cover events that happen after the boss fight and the introduction of Fuka to the party, as well as other events that have occurred right after the next boss fight on the list. Regardless, I also want to change the structure of this episode and do something a little bit different this time around. Instead of giving my opinion at the end of the episode, we'll do it right now as the introduction, and only then will we delve into each chapter and look at the factors that have actually influenced my opinion in such a way. So without further ado, let's get to the opinion. I believe this arc to be pretty solid. There are a lot of new additions on the gameplay side of things, which make the game a lot more fun to play, especially in Tartarus. There is a lot to see regarding the party members. You learn a lot about them throughout this arc. However, I feel like the story is a bit of a letdown because although we do get some hints as to what has happened, we still don't really know where the story converges and where we are headed with it. And that part regarding the main story unfortunately does affect my opinion of the game in a pretty negative way, though I do think that most of it was good gameplay wise, so we'll dive into that. There's a lot I want to cover regarding gameplay for this section, so let's just start with some things that are pretty minor and that just reinforce the points I've been making in episode 2. As it turns out, Fuka's abilities are actually all active abilities. I've discovered this by just simply leveling up and gaining a new ability, which is a buff that I can use right before a battle. It costs SPE on Fuka's part to activate, and it is a setup sort of move. Now, if you remember what I said during part 2, I specifically said that I really like the fact that Fuka was pretty interactive, and the fact that she unlocks even more active abilities over time is a really nice touch, and I really have to praise the game for that. The second thing I wanted to briefly touch upon is the fact that Makoto unlocks new abilities as he levels up. I already mentioned Third in episode 2 and the fact that he had multiple abilities available to him. However, as you level up, you also unlock passive abilities. The first one is called the Leader's Characteristics. It's simply a passive that increases the damage you deal whenever you hit an enemy's weakness. Now, I don't know if you are going to unlock more of these abilities as the game goes on. I would love for that to be the case because I think that's a neat addition. I guess we'll see as my review progresses. With that said, let's move on to the other mechanics that were added throughout this arc. There is a reason as to why I chose gameplay to be the first chapter of this video. It's because there is a lot that has been added and a lot of depth that comes with it. The first addition is side missions that you have to complete within Tartarus. These take the form of civilians trapped within Tartarus that you have to rescue and escort back to the entrance. Elizabeth will contact you whenever she has information regarding those, but if you go to the police station and check the notice board, you can see which people are missing and the reward to find them. Note that there is a time limit to rescue those people. Generally, that is at the end of a moon cycle, and that the rewards are pretty nice, giving you either money or other items that could be very useful. This is reminiscent of Memento's missions, I would say. You don't really have to fight in mini-boss or anything like that. It's just go to a floor and find the person, then collect the bounty the next day. But I would say it's mostly similar because it's also optional content that you can do that just gives you rewards. The second mechanic is introduced on the 18th of July. It's a new shop that opens at the mall, specifically called the Antique Shop. This shop enables a player to craft new weapons or a new set of armors for their teammates, for themselves, as well as trade gems for items or skill cards. The requirements to do the crafting, however, are kind of tough and limited, and the way to acquire those necessary materials is to go into Tartarus and to delve into the next mechanics I'm about to talk about. After having defeated the boss on the 7th of July, the earliest time you can go back to Tartarus would be on the 18th of the same month. This is when you would be introduced to the new mechanic called monad doors. Elizabeth will tell you that there are distortions within Tartarus, but she's unable to give you more information at this time. You will have to actually climb up Tartarus and find one of those doors for yourself before you actually know what they are. Monad doors are some kind of mini-boss area that spawn randomly within a floor of Tartarus. These are completely optional, and these also disappear if you are to leave the floor. Even if you come back on the same day, those will not reappear. If you see the door, you have to take your opportunity and go, or decide, oh, this is going to be too tough and I can't go in right now. Going in is a nice source of XP for yourself and for your party members, but your reward for beating those bosses is a set of material that you can trade or use to craft item at the antique shop. Some of these bosses can be really rough. The first one I encountered actually poisoned my whole team. Like on turn 1, I had no way of curing poison for my whole team, and I found out the hard way that whenever you're poisoned, you cannot charge up 3rd-G, you cannot use 3rd-G, you cannot even do all-out attacks, and as far as I know, it seems to be a permanent status effect. You have to cure it. Since I had just used my support persona for something else recently, running into that boss was quite difficult. The other ones I encountered were also quite challenging, but not as much as this one. As far as I know, these are all randomized, but I'm not sure 100% because I've only encountered 3 of those doors so far. Once you climb up all the way to the next roadblock, which is on floor 91, Elizabeth will tell you that there is another challenge for you. These are called monad passages. They're basically some kind of gauntlet where you fight multiple mini-bosses. These are completely optional, but these give you pretty nice rewards. These can be very, very difficult, especially on harder difficulties. By the time you reach the door, you're most likely already worn out by having fought all the mini-bosses that led to the roadblock. And I can imagine that on relentless difficulty or something like that, you would probably have to back out of Tartarus for the night and come back another night to beat those low sections. And while we're talking about enemies and bosses, the gatekeepers that you have to fight through in order to get to the roadblock are also quite challenging at times and quite frustrating. Not necessarily in a bad way though, because once you actually do defeat them, you feel like you've overcome something. It's not just cheese or just annoyances that you have to fight through. So I really like that. Originally, I had a pretty major UX complaint to fit in here. I found out that the XP that you gain is actually divided between members of your team and yourself. It is not shared. This implies that if you have multiple personas with the growth passive ability, these will also take away XP that you need to level up a party member or a specific persona that you want. So the best strategy was to go with only one party member or completely solo in order to efficiently level up. However, in the month of July, the game introduced a new mechanic that is actually countering this entire point. I will call it the clock room mechanic. Basically, using shards within Tartarus to open chests has a chance of spawning a door that leads to a big room with a clock. The clock is similar to the one that you used at the entrance of Tartarus to regenerate SP and HP for the entire party. However, this one lets you select 2 party members that are below Makoto's level, and in the next fight, those party members will immediately gain enough XP to match Makoto's level. This is effectively a catch-up mechanic for party members that were left behind. This is great because it also cuts through a lot of grinding that you would have to do. This addition just comes at the right time because I was starting to be a bit worried, considering the fact that I already have one party member that always stays in reserve at this time, and knowing that there will be more party members coming soon, I was really not looking forward to the idea of grinding. So that's a really cool addition, and I think that wraps up everything I had to say about the gameplay. Now that we've covered everything related to gameplay, let's talk about the main story. To begin, I just wanted to talk about the last boss that we fought on July 7th. To give you some context, this boss appears to be within a love hotel. So you have a whole sequence where you go throughout a hotel during the dark hour and figure out where the boss is. I cannot show you too much footage of that because I think that would probably get me banned off YouTube. Regardless though, it is a pretty cool setup and I find it it to be probably my favorite boss fight thus far. What happens is you find the room where the shadow is supposed to be and you do fight a boss there. Once you're done, it turns out that you are actually locked in the room for some reason. Your party tries to look around and find an exit, but somehow you black out. You wake up in a completely different room. You hear that someone is in the shower, and it takes you a little while before you realize that you are being manipulated. You snap out of it, and it turns out that the person that was in the shower was Yukari. She also had been brainwashed by the shadow. She's hanging out there with a towel, and she just panics and slaps you. I guess that's kind of deserved. Once you break free of the shadow's power, you try and seek out the rest of your party members. In my case, I had Akihiko and Mitsuru as my active party. Once you actually do find them within the hotel, it turns out that the game implies that the same situation happened between the two of them. Mitsuru is definitely a bit flustered and just avoids the topic. Either way, we figure out that the shadow was actually hiding within the mirrors of the hotel. So we look throughout different rooms until we find the right mirror, and then we fight the real boss. I didn't find this boss to be too difficult, but it is still my favorite boss just because of the setup. You can really tell that some devs had a little bit too much fun setting up some suggestive scenes with coffins, like this one for example. But it's also the first boss that is given a full environment that you can really navigate through. It was much more enjoyable than the monorail boss or the boss that we fought on the night where we rescued Fuka. 10 out of 10, best boss. However though, I did say that I did not enjoy the main story in this arc that much. So let me give you some explanation as to why I said that. So far, each time we've reached a border floor within Tartarus, we've ran into a chest that contained an old document. These documents seem to be notes that are telling the story of Tartarus or what happened there. At the very least, they are giving you clues as to what is actually going on. The issue is that you are able to complete an entire wing of Tartarus within a single night. It's not that difficult. And so as soon as I was able to go back into Tartarus, I went there and grabbed the document. On that document, the name Kirijo is mentioned. Kirijo is the last name of Mitsuru. Now, between the moment I got the document and the moment that the game addressed the contents of it, an entire month had gone by. So as a player, I already kind of knew that Mitsuru may have been involved within the creation of Tartarus, but it took an entire eternity for the cast to actually acknowledge that fact. Now, you do hear rumors that the school had been destroyed about 10 years ago in an explosion. Some people were killed and some students apparently disappeared. Yukari is the first one to grow suspicious of Mitsuru's intentions. She feels as though Fuka was kind of rushed into the dorms and not really given a choice. So she decides to investigate, and she gets the help of Fuka to actually find out some more information. Later on July 11th, Cease as well as the chairman meet up to try and discuss what happened and debrief over the last boss fight. This is when Yukari decides to actually confront Mitsuru about her intentions and reveal what she knows. She discovered that the students that had gone missing 10 years ago were actually unconscious. They were sent to the hospital and there was a huge cover-up. She connects the dots with what's been happening recently with girls being found unconscious on the skull ground. And with that revelation, Mitsuru is forced to talk about her past and what she knows. She explains that her grandfather, who was a very powerful man within the Kirijo group, had actually tried to set up a facility to harness the power of shadows. She doesn't really know how her grandfather would have used that power, but we can assume that it was probably for something evil. She explains that while the experiments worked fine at first, 10 years ago there was an explosion that led to the creation of Tartarus and the Dark Hour. That explosion killed a lot of people, including Mitsuru's grandfather. However, the Dark Hour and the shadows had been dormant for a long time and only started to reappear recently. This is when the chairman will intervene and actually propose his theory. He believes that there is a total of 12 major shadows, 6 of which we've already defeated. He thinks that once we'll defeat all of them, then Tartarus and the Dark Hour will cease to exist. Whether he's lying or whether he is actually in the right, we don't know just yet. But for now, the group decides to go along with that theory. Speaking of people trying to use the power of shadows and the dark hour to their own benefit, there is a scene that occurs on June 22nd that actually shows someone trying to do exactly that. We are shown a group of 3 unnamed individuals that seem to be trying to murder someone. The group makes another apparition right after we beat the boss on July 7th. They seem to be watching us and to be interested in our skills, but it is still unclear who they are and what their motivations may be. A couple days after having had this difficult conversation within the command room, everyone at the dorm is trying to figure out plans to hang out during the summer. We decide to go to the beach, and the chairman actually finds us a place to go to. Turns out he picked a place where Mitsuru's dad is located. Mitsuru is very disturbed by this, and Yukari actually goes up to her and asks what's up. Turns out that Mitsuru has reasons to believe that her dad was also involved with the accident that created Tartarus. In a way, she's been trying to keep her distance from him. Now, after having heard all of this, you probably wonder why I think this arc is kind of lukewarm when it comes to the story. I mean, we've got so many new details, and we are starting to see the foundations of the plot. My issue is that if you actually look at what we've been given, we don't know that much about the entire plot, really. I mean, think about it. We know that Tartarus was created because of a freak experiment. How were those experiments conducted? What was the Kirijo group actually trying to do with the shadows? We do see actual villains, but we don't even know their names or what they actually want to do. But what does Tartarus actually represent? Why do we still try and climb up Tartarus when we know that the enemies are going to show up every full moon? You see what I mean, right? Like, we are starting to get the setup of the plot, but we don't really know where it is going just yet. And I totally would be fine with that had it occurred about 10 hours ago in my playthrough. Just to remind you, I'm 35 hours into my playthrough right now, and I'm barely getting any clues as to what Tartarus is and what actually happened. The plot is still very scattered all over the place, and that is the reason why I couldn't really enjoy the story during this arc. It's still very vague and very foggy for us. However, this arc does give us enough clues to start theorizing about what is going on here, which is what I'm planning to do at the end of this video. But before we get into that, we also have to talk about the member of Cease, because there's a lot that is revealed throughout this arc, and a lot of the theories I've been able to come up with are actually pretty reliant on knowing these different backstories. So without further ado, let's talk about the different members and their character progression. Before we take a deep dive on each character's backstory, I wanted to quickly mention a new feature that was introduced early on in June. Fuka will move into the dorm, and Mitsuru will decide that it's actually a good opportunity to show you around. After taking a quick glance around the dorm, you unlock what I would call hangouts. These are activities that you can do with party members at the dorm during the evening hours. For example, you may want to watch a movie with Yukari, cook with Mitsuru, read a book with Fuka or Junpei. Some of these will reward you with items that you can use, while others will contribute to your social stat. And I gotta say, that's a really nice touch. I felt like these interactions were kind of missing in Persona 3. If we compare to Persona 5, Ryuji becomes a confidant very early on in the game. You actually get to spend time with him pretty much on the second week of the game. And after having finished the Kamoshida arc, Anne is also available as a confidant. It just didn't really feel right considering that we are risking our lives going into Tartarus every night, but we don't really hang out with those people that we have to rely on. Having these little interactions means that you also start seeing those characters as friends, which I find to be a very important point in Persona games, right? The relationship aspect of it is always central. People are very fond of the characters, and you cannot be fond of a character that you don't interact with. These hangouts also play into each character's personality. For example, Yukari might request to watch a scary movie with you because she's scared of doing it alone, while Akihiko will instead propose that you watch some wrestling videos or whatever he's into, I guess. Either way, this is the first stepping block that allows us to start connecting with these characters. We eventually do get a large amount of backstory regarding each member on July 12th. The palpable tension of the last debrief session that occurred the day before leads every member of the cast to actually reflect on themselves and on their motivations. We get to observe those reflections through a series of cutscenes. Let's start by looking at Junpei's. On July 7th, we already get a taste of Junpei's jealousy towards Mikoto. He resents him for being a better leader than he is, and throughout this cutscene we actually get to see that he feels that he's good at nothing at all. This may actually be the first time we see him sad in the entire game, as far as I'm aware. He's pretty depressed that Tartarus is going to disappear, because he realizes that his only strength is fighting, and once Tartarus will be gone, there will be nothing left for him. He does resent himself for even having that thought, however, and that does seemingly give him a goal. He wants to be better than Mikoto, he wants to be better at life in general, he wants to find purpose, and you could say that his motivation is to fight. Now I want you to pay close attention to the concept of motivation throughout the following cutscenes. Not only will it be a recurring theme, this is actually going to be crucial for me to explain my theory at the end of the video. Following this, we can take a look at Yukari's cutscene. She is reading through a letter that her dad wrote to her. It's a time capsule sort of thing, because that letter was written 10 years ago. We get another allusion as to what Yukari's father used to do in life. Now, this isn't the first time we actually find that information. It is actually briefly mentioned at the very start of the game, right after Makoto's evoke his persona for the first time. But I had completely missed that line, and I had to go look a let's play to actually discover that it is already mentioned prior to this scene. Either way, we find out that Yukari's dad actually worked for Kirijo, and considering the timeline, it looks like he may have been involved with the incident. Obviously, Yukari's main emotion is grief, but she also shows some resolve. She is angered that her mother has turned her back on her dad. We don't really get full context as to what she means by that. Perhaps she was unable to really keep fighting in life after the death of her husband, or perhaps she never tried and questioned what happened to him. Either way, it is said clearly by Yukari that she does not want to become like her mother, and with that, her resolve is to keep fighting as well and to find the truth. We also get to see a cutscene between two different members of SIS, this one being Mitsuru and Fuka talking together. Mitsuru is feeling quite guilty for a lot of things. Not only does she have to deal with the guilt of what her family has done to the world, but she also feels as though she's been mistreating other members of SIS, specifically Fuka, who has been kind of rushed into the team way too quickly. Mitsuru praises Fuka's abilities, especially regarding intel gathering, and she asks her for a request. She would like Fuka to dig into the archives of the Kirijo group, specifically by hacking into the database and looking at whether she could find more information regarding what happened 10 years ago. And while she apologizes again for forcing Fuka to change her lifestyle just to integrate SIS so quickly, Fuka is actually showing herself to be quite thankful for everything that happened. She explains that her family is made up of doctors entirely, with the exception of her parents, both of whom have grown very bitter at having failed at life, thus creating a very tough situation at home for her to live in. Fuka is obviously quite thankful for what happened here, and she openly and clearly states that being here at the dorm actually feels like she's gotten purpose out of this. Something I wanted to briefly mention about these two characters and the dynamic at play here is how, if you think about it, Fuka's entire family, with the exception of her parents, is made to be doctors, which implies that they are good people, whereas Mitsu's family is known to be evil. In fact, we also get to see through another event that Mitsu's dad is still alive, and that she believes him to also have been involved in what happened 10 years ago. Either way, if we had to sum up Mitsuru's motivation at this point of the game, we could say that she wants to undo the past. She wants to find the truth, sure, but she also wants to fix what her parents and grandparents have done. The issue being that her will to fix everything has actually blinded her at times, putting other people in dangerous situations as a result. Another quick side note, something I just found to be quite interesting. We can clearly make the assumption that Fuka felt trapped at home with her parents. And isn't it kind of ironic for the character that had to be saved from Tartarus to be the one that feels trapped in life? This most likely doesn't mean anything, I just thought it was kinda neat. And for the last cutscene, we actually get to see Akihiko and Aragaki, whom I'm going to refer to as Shinji from now on. A bit earlier in this arc, there's also another cutscene with Shinji, where Akihiko points out that Shinji is also a Persona user.
We've got 4 new members this year. Things have changed quite a bit since you left. We're more aggressive now.
Not interested.
Think about it, Shinji. Don't let your power go to waste.
While this is not the first time that Shinji appears in-game, I made no mention of him whatsoever in the first 2 episodes because his first apparition was pretty much a short one at the hospital back when Akihiko was still getting treatment. That was very early into the game. And the second one was a very quick apparition right before we actually went to rescue Fuka. This is when we actually get to hear his name for the first time. Shinji and Akihiko have always shown themselves to be quite close, but it is not explained why or how they know each other. But this cutscene that plays on the 12th is going to show a lot more character for the both of them. This one I thought was worth looking at in full, so pay attention to what is being said here.
That's so.
We've known each other a long time. It's been almost 14 years since we met at the orphanage. You, me, and Miki. We used to run around here until the sun went down. Back then, it seemed like we had all the time in the world.
You haven't changed one bit. If you want to get all sappy, go do it with your other pals.
What was that?
It's rare for you to think about the past. Usually, you just charge ahead like a damn fool. You've never been good at hiding shit.
Everyone thinks about the past. Even me. Anyway, we finally know how to get rid of Tartarus in the dark hour.
No shit?
Yeah. The thing is, all I've cared about until now is getting stronger. Everything else came second. But yesterday, someone made me question my reason for fighting.
Your reason for fighting? Huh. It's different for everyone. But if you don't have a good one, you can always quit. That's what I did.
I'm not like you. Man, I can't believe I'm the one getting lectured here. Well, see you around.
You really haven't changed at all.
So to recap what we've just learned, both Akihiko and Shinji are orphans. They met at the orphanage about 14 years ago. There's a third person that's mentioned called Miki. But most important of all, we find out what Akihiko's reasons to fight is. Well, what it used to be at least. He fought for self-improvement. That was his own goal. And the confrontation that he had with Yukari the other night has put that goal back into perspective. Then we find out that Shinji has given up on his goal, turning into more of an apathetic kind of person as a result. And with that cutscene out of the way, we have every card in hand to start analyzing what's going on here. All? Actually, almost all of them. You'll see in a second. Grief, aspiration, and connection. These are recurring themes throughout every cutscene we just watched. Every member of SEAS has gone through some kind of trauma. We also get a glimpse at the possible next member of SEAS, Ken, who is also an orphan, further demonstrating that this is a recurring theme throughout every single member so far. Every one of them looks towards the future in some way, and all of them reference another person, whether it's Yukari's dad or Fuka's family. But the pattern doesn't end here. Would you be surprised if I told you that every social link follows that exact same pattern? I already mentioned in episode 2 that all of these people seem to have pretty difficult lives outside of school. But take a look at Bebe, for example.
My aunt, she was taken by the angels.
He experiences grief firsthand by losing his aunt. Obviously, he also mentions her as well as his uncle, so we have connections and grief. But on top of that, his aspiration is made clear. He wants to remain in Japan. So it seems that grief is the binding thread that links all of these characters together. And yet, there is still one missing piece to that. I couldn't figure out what it was until... it hit me. There was an outlier right in front of our eyes this whole time. Makoto actually gets a cutscene on the 12th of July, only his cutscene actually is with Theorizing. Pharos has picked a name for himself since the last arc, and I hadn't really thought much of him until I actually paid close attention to his design. Look at him. Doesn't he remind you of someone? The hair color, the eyes, the fact that he seems to have intimate knowledge about Makoto's past. Could this be Makoto's inner child? I mean, he does even mention that he will always be there for Makoto, regardless of what happens. So while other characters are thinking about the future and are thinking about other people, Makoto is the only person that is thinking about the past and whose cutscene is solely dedicated to himself. Recently, I came across this image, and when I looked at it with the context of what was said in Junpei's cutscene, suddenly his entire behavior made a lot more sense to me. From the first few hours of the game where he is overtly friendly with Makoto despite not even knowing him that much. So perhaps it is not faulty to apply the same logic to Makoto's cutscene with Pharos. I've always said that Makoto's behavior was quite odd when you thought about it. He joined Cease without any kind of complaint. He's always followed Mitsu's orders. He was made the leader of the Tartarus exploration team. And yet, he doesn't actually seem to have motivations of his own. Looking back at Theorizing, for example, I already explained how this ability is based on the user's personality, and Makoto actually doesn't have an ability by default. The abilities that he gets from Theorizing are all fusion related, which makes sense because he doesn't actually have his own persona really. He's just borrowing from a pool of personas. Whereas every other character's past seemed to define their personality today, Makoto's personality seems completely untouched. And Pharos, taking the form of his inner child, seems to imply that he hasn't actually grown past his trauma, he's just trying to look away from it. At least that's what I make of this. And while all of this information still doesn't give me a clear picture as to say the story is going this way and not in that way, I think I can kind of predict what's going to happen in the next few arcs. We're going to understand Makoto's mind a bit better. We may also get answers as to what exactly makes a person immune to the effects of the Dark Hour. I do believe that the answer has something to do with trauma, and I think that's where the game is headed next. So that wraps up everything I had to say for this episode. As I've said in the introduction, the story remains so foggy that it's still pretty hard to comprehend it so far. This arc has given us more clues though, enough for me to present a little theory here. I wouldn't be surprised if it was completely off the mark, but at the very least the game is starting to get me engaged to a point where I want to think about its story and where it leads. We'll see if my theories hold up into episode 4. And with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. This really helps me out. It's super encouraging to see people actually looking into my videos and listening to what I have to say. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again for episode 4. See ya!